All right, welcome to Radical Books and Politics. It is an honor and a privilege to be here with my co-moderator Daniel Brooks and Steve Miller from Lorna, Oakland. We're here with Shane from La Voz de los Trabajadores and Howard Ehrman from the People's Response. And we're here to talk about a really important issue in our day, and that has to do with safe returns in schools. And I please, if you're on the chat, go ahead and Shane from La Voz de los Trabajadores. Hold up, my brothers. I'm sorry, I'm streaming over here. Please comment, ask questions, because the show is only as popping as your reactions and comments to it. I see we're getting some likes. That's good. Get him some love. If you comment, your face is not going to show up on the stream though, so don't be afraid. So I thought maybe in the order of Daniel, why don't we start with you? Introduce yourselves and tell people where you're from.
Hi, everybody. I'm Daniel. I'm here in Indianapolis, Indiana, where I'm from. I'm a special education teacher here in a charter school here in the Indianapolis metro area. And we're at the heart of when you see red on the map, think Indiana for sure, just like everywhere else now. There just recently, it's been reported that, for the last few weeks now, it's been reported that there's been thousands of cases of COVID within schools all throughout Indiana. Not too long ago, it was also reported that over 1,200 schools were not reporting COVID cases in their school as well. So, yeah.
How many cases were those? Over 12,000, or what did you say, 1,200?
Over 1,200 schools that weren't reporting cases, upward to about, I think the last report was about 5,500 new cases among Indiana students in the last weekly update there on Monday.
That is unconscionable. I can't imagine. Steve from Oakland, go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm a retired science teacher. I taught in Fremont High and Life Academy. These are flatland high schools, which are the poorest part of Oakland. Although I retired, I taught for 25 years, and I'm just not going to relinquish the forum just because I retired here. The same kind of genocide is going on now that was going on then, if not worse. And we have a school board that's completely controlled by the real estate industry, because closing schools is all about a real estate deal, and Oakland wants to close schools right and left. They intend to close schools, but the testing issue postponed that for a bit because they can only look bad within limits. They can't really expose what they want to do. The most horrific thing that we have to deal with is that the school board tells us that legally they may not respond to anything that we say. So you can make comments all you want to, and they just look at you. In fact, they're not paying much attention. They're all on their laptops. They don't make eye contact, and you have 1 minute to speak on what they tell you can speak on. And if you speak about something else, they just cut you off.
1 minute.
Yeah. Wow. And I'll go on for more, but
sure.
I'll do that later on.
Thank you, Stephen. That's ridiculous. We get 4 minutes, but they're very, very diligent in cutting us off. But we can say a lot in 4 minutes.
Yeah.
Shane from La Voz de los Trabajadores, tell us about you and your organization or what you're experiencing.
Hello, everybody. My name is Shane, and I live and teach high school in Oakland for the public school system. I have a daughter who's in TK in Oakland public schools as well. La Voz de los Trabajadores is a group that I've been a member of for about 2 years now, and just trying to get intervene and where we can, with coworkers and other parts of the working class. But yeah, I really appreciate Dr. Jesu Estrada for having us, and I look forward to this discussion today.
No, it's my pleasure. Howard Ehrman from the People's Response. How about you? Oh, I'll unmute you, son. Sorry, I muted him. Go ahead. Unmute. There you go.
Yeah. I don't know if you can hear me. It's kind of breaking up. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you just fine, Howard.
Oh, yeah, great. Well, thanks so much for doing this. My name's Howard Ehrman. I've lived and worked in the little village neighborhood of Chicago for the last 52 years, and I'm one of the co-founders of many who started the People's Response Network in February 1st of 2020, because we could see immediately this was not just a Trump problem. This is a problem of all the liberal Democrats who, to this day, now that they supposedly have power, are basically willing to sacrifice and kill children in schools, the workers in schools, the frontline workers everywhere, particularly African American and Latinos. So we started the People's Response. It's open to anybody. It's a network. It's not a formal coalition, but we have 28 grassroots organizations. We have 2 elected officials in Chicago. We have 2 unions, including Maria Jesus Union, who's involved. And so we invite everyone. And what we're going to do is relaunch our national meetings next month, because this is a national and international issue.
Absolutely.
Of things like vaccine apartheid. But I'm here first and foremost because I have 2 grandchildren in the Chicago public schools and a 4-year-old granddaughter in public schools in Wisconsin, who's an incredible risk, like everybody else, to get COVID, long COVID, and die. So thank you so much for inviting us.
Howard, it's my pleasure. And my son was supposed to be here, but he's swimming, which is good. He's been in the press a lot, but he was really just so moved by the People's Response discussions, and he joined. I was sad because I wanted him to join my organization first, which is the League of Revolutionists for New America. But I won't quibble about that. He joined the committee. But I think that goes to show how the youth have such a clear understanding about what's happening and what's at stake. And at one point, I told the parent, I said, shit, my 11-year-old son has more critical analysis, more critical thinking, more heart. He would do a better job of running CPS. CPS is the Chicago public school system. And it breaks my heart that recently the mayor hired the CEO who's pro-charter school, who's pro-giving money to private schools, who said that his goal is to keep schools open. He's not the right fit for Chicago. At this juncture, the way the country is going, I don't think he's the right fit anywhere. But that raises a question about the type of leaders that we need and what's actually who is leading. Now, Steve, I'll start with you because you mentioned that part of the problem are the schools closing because they're at the mercy of these real estate capitalists. It's the same in Chicago. But can you talk about how perhaps you mentioned the board, how the school leadership is not doing what's right by our kids, and what kind of leadership we do need? Does that make sense?
Well, first of all, they got $290 million to deal with COVID and to deal with equity in the schools. They then came up with a plan. This is all from downtown administrators who sat around the table. And then the school board just proclaims it. There's no discussion of it. There's no transparency. It's full of holes. Parents and teachers are complaining left and right, and they just sit there and look at you. One of the most interesting things that happened a couple of school board meetings ago, and I should say that they've had their first public school board meeting 5 weeks ago, and parents were so upset about what was going on that they disrupted the meeting. So now it's all online because COVID is dangerous, but all the kids go to school and the teachers go to school, but they're happily sitting there online, making it almost impossible for people to actually present things.
That is disgusting, Steve. That is questionable. I'm sorry. We got to call it out.
So now they claim they don't have any money. And they stopped as soon as the one consistently decent school board member, Mike Hutchinson, started saying, you guys have to do testing here. They stopped testing. And what do you know? The numbers of COVID going down in Oakland because we don't test anymore.
Wow.
So this is the kind of stuff that goes on. And I also want to note that nationally, the week ending September 9th, which was before New York opened and I think before Chicago opened, there were 243,000 youth cases of COVID, up from in June, 8,000 or something like that. And it's been over 200,000 for the last month every week.
Jesus,
It just, and New York, Chicago opened, but it takes 10 days for the infection to really spread. So we can expect to see more of this. And with New York, we can expect to see more of this.
And yeah, I got to tell you that just anecdotally, part of the problem is how they're reporting numbers, right? And so in my kid's school where he goes to NTA, which is a fantastic militant school. 4 classes have been quarantined. A sick kid came to school the first day of my son's class. The administration found out on Tuesday. Luckily, we have a principle of conscience. The class went into quarantine on Wednesday. But 4 schools, all young kids, kindergarten, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 6th grade, because none of those kids can get vaccinated, right? It's a lot. So Shane, how about you? Tell us about the leadership and how they're handling this reopening plans.
The leadership of this district, or like which angle you want to?
Let's talk about who's really calling the shots. For us, it's the mayor, who's doing a piss poor job in Chicago. A board that should be elected that is appointed by the mayor, and now we're going to have this jackass CEO that just because he's Latino in Chicago, he's got to be good for public schools, right? Wrong. So let's talk about them.
So I think, to me, in Oakland, like we're still under like a state trustee, and so I think the state trustee has been, the one kind of, like the state trustee who gets to sign off on all economic decisions, budget decisions. So in general, like to me, like the school board, over the summer, they just said we're turning everything over to the district and we're going to go on vacation. So, this is a pandemic, mind you. They did this 2 years in a row. They said, we're going to go, like the district's in charge. The superintendent has the decision-making powers. We're going to go on vacation. Wow. Like literally, that was their response.
Wow.
And so they came up with this, plan. We signed a safety MOU right as school was starting. Basically, like I think the union leadership just went in there and said, whatever you guys want.
Wow.
They just kind of laid down and said, here's what we want, whatever else, like you can do what you will. And we came up with this horrendous safety MOU. Like literally, like the district decided to go with this ridiculous idea of a modified quarantine rather than weekly testing.
What is that?
I have no idea. It's, basically whatever it is, they think of it. And Steve's right. Like, because there was far too many cases in the first 2-3 weeks of schools, they just said, okay, well, let's just stop testing. Like Oakland High was kind of like ground zero for positive cases. And they admitted they're not testing there anymore. They basically just said, yeah, we're not going to test.
Well, and I would say, Shane, that even when they do test, and I'm saying this from Chicago, they purposely don't report the numbers accurately. How they log infections is really hinky, right? They look at cases in the building. They should look at overall cases. So I always assume whatever they're reporting, double and triple it. So Kathy Powers, comrade, good to see you. She says the city of Chicago has a portal that does not accurately report infections, quarantines, and refuses to teach quarantine students online. Absolutely. And that's one of the demands as a parent that we're making, that they should offer the remote option. And my son and I were cracking up because we kept looking at the COVID counter, and they reported the one in this class, but we knew for sure there were at least 3 others. They're still not reporting it. Yet the classes are currently quarantined, right? It's really unethical. Daniel, how about you? And Daniel, feel free. If you have questions, jump right in, brother.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the situation is very similar here in Indiana. I think what's different is that the schools opened a little bit earlier here. So Indiana kind of, along with many schools in the South or other places, became kind of the litmus test before the other schools decided to reopen, which is really scary considering that there are already upward to hundreds to thousands of cases in Indiana schools before other school districts across the country even began opening. So you would think that would have been an indication that maybe opening schools wouldn't have been a good idea if hundreds of schools had already been opened at the onset of the year, and there's already been cases and it's already been a disaster. In terms of the portal, in terms of reporting, Indiana is experiencing the same thing. I think to look back into the summer is important when the CDC kind of sent out, well, you know, if you're outside, you don't really have to wear your mask. Or if you're vaccinated, you know, if you're inside of a building, you don't really have to wear your mask. And then they came back again and said, oh, well, actually, you do have to wear your mask. And this is right just weeks before the schools were due to be open. And I can personally say that I was in professional development, and we came back after the CDC had said that, had suggested that, and I walked into professional development, and the vast majority of staff were not wearing masks at all. And this was before the school even opened. So this was the sentiment. This was the climate before schools even opened. And what do you think exactly is going to happen when schools begin to open? The mask is going to be kind of loose and whatnot. In terms of the leadership here, I think Governor Holcomb does most of the dirty work here. He actually just recently eased quarantine like measures according to whether the schools are wearing their masks. So if you have a mask mandate as a school, or if everyone was wearing their mask, then the quarantine measures are loosened. So that kind of tells you, the sentiment here in Indiana. And really, it's just like anywhere else. They want to keep the schools open. They don't want to close them. They don't care if it's thousands of people that gets infected. They don't care who dies.
Exactly.
Obviously, the schools that were struggling before the pandemic are struggling most now. Things are only getting worse. And there doesn't seem to be any type of effort to close the schools anytime soon.
Yeah, that's well said. Kathy says the new Chicago unelected school board CEO did not even address COVID safety in his opening address. He said how wonderful the school system will be because it will be concentrating on academics. Excellent points. And then Lee, welcome Lee. She says our federal government needs to step in. Absolutely. I think I'm going to take that point next. Federal policies. But Howard, let's hear from you. Howard left. He may be back. I think he was traveling and having. So let's talk about these federal guidelines, because one of the problems I see that there are no federal guidelines. And okay, look, I don't get me started on Biden. I know people want to move things according to normal, but let's be real. What does that mean? And why are they pushing so much for schools to be open when they know it's not safe? I don't remember which of his lackeys basically said that they were not going to go remote. They were not going to roll back. So they see going back to safety as somehow losing, right? But what do you think about this idea of having federal policies that keep our kids safe? Oh, shit. I think I froze up for a little bit. Let's start with Steve. You're muted. Unmute, brother.
What do you know? The thing that we have learned and was very clear is that you have to have a national policy. It's simple. I mean, we do have national policy for all kind of vaccination, like chicken pox and mumps and measles. Kids have got to get vaccinated, period. But in this case, Trump put the market in charge, which has been gouging everybody ever since, as we see with these billionaires making, humongous profits, incalculable amounts of money off of this. The other thing I think we all see is that public safety means everybody's safe or nobody's safe.
That's right. Absolutely right.
We just have to operate on that basis. And everybody understood that early on. But we're in a country which we're seeing a rising fascist element that wants to privatize. Well, they do want to privatize the schools for sure, but they politicize everything. So this is take the anger and politicize the anger, whatever it is. It doesn't matter for them because it's just going to lead to more and more attacks. And in fact, they now have a national policy of. Steve Bannon said the road to saving America is to take over the school boards. And you don't see this in Oakland so much because, in fact, they already did take over the school board. But in other places, you see parents mobbing up and attacking school board members across the country public health workers, teachers, even police are retiring because the complexities of dealing with COVID without support are so difficult. And so you've got teacher shortages all over the place. You got substitute shortages all over the place, school bus driver shortages.
Yes.
And, you know, the idea that you're going to maintain a level of education where any given week, all these kids have to quarantine is insanity. And furthermore, in Oakland or in California, the governor who was under a recall, and he won the recall, but so what he did was he decreed that schools could not continue with online learning, that you had to, if anybody didn't want to go to school, then they had to take a special study situation rather than go to any online stuff.
Wow.
Where they come in once a week and they turn in their homework, and then, you know, it's like if a kid had leukemia or something.
Right.
So, you know, it just gets worse and worse. And, you know, I think we're watching the public schools dissolving before our eyes.
Yeah. No, I can't disagree with that. And a lot of times I say that they're having this fail by design. So Howard, what about you? We moved on from the question of who's in charge to the question of what would it mean to have federal guidelines, good federal guidelines that were science-based and truly health-based. What would that look like for you, Howard?
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, I've been having trouble with the technical stuff here.
No worries.
So I just want to make a comment about what I did here, and that is, see, I think the problem that we have in the United States is that lots of people on the left are not clear or not willing to take a stand against the bourgeois capitalist liberal Democratic Party. So the main problem since Biden's gotten elected, honestly, is not the right. It's basically the genocidal CDC guidelines. Basically the only school district that's done anything right is the Los Angeles Unified School District, and that's in spite of the federal government and the governor of California. So what would the things look like? I should say I was a former assistant commissioner of health here in Chicago under Mayor Washington. And I think the first thing that I think are all united on, there's no such thing as a safe school in the United States. There are ways to make schools safer, but there are absolutely no way that anybody should be in school right now. There's no way that any teacher, any staff member, or certainly any student, particularly students under 12, should be in school. I literally got off the phone right before this meeting with an Apple rep from Texas who literally just on her own, after we started talking, told me about how she and her sister got infected because her 2 vaccinated kids got infected in school. And this is happening every minute during this conversation. So what things would look like is, first of all, that we have to shut down schools. We have to organize mass strikes on a local, regional, and national basis, not just of the workers in the schools, but the parents and the students in the schools, together with frontline workers who have been dying by the minute since this pandemic began. Now, you can't just organize a strike or tell kids not to go to school or parents not to go to school if you don't also organize not just to restore unemployment benefits, but to make it so that particularly frontline African American and Latino and Native American workers can afford to stay at home to take care of their kids. Because if you can't do that, you can't tell parents, oh yeah, it's unsafe to send their kids to school. There are different left groups that are saying, let's have a parent strike, let's not send our kids to school. But you can't just say that. You've got to give people the actual reality of being able to stay at home, with their kids. In terms of what should happen when schools reopen, maybe later on, once things have calmed down in terms of Delta, number one is you can't just have schools that are closed down. You got to close down any non-essential frontline, workers and businesses and agencies. Schools themselves, it's real clear what should happen. It's nothing that the CDC says because the CDC guidelines are wrong.
That's right.
Obviously, social distancing should be at least 6 feet. We know the main way that this disease is spread is through people talking and eating, not through coughing and sneezing, although those are important. We've got to have masks on. We've got to open up every school, particularly in black and brown neighborhoods, to be vaccination centers right now for everyone, 12 hours a day, days a week.
That's
We've got to
right.
have real ventilation in the schools, not the nonsense that the CDC and the local school districts are doing. I'll just give you one example. The CDC says 1 to 2 room air changes per hour. That's not the standard. The standard is 6 to 7. We've got to have be able to have social distancing. You've got to hire more staff because
That's
there's
right.
no way that any school system could possibly have social distancing with the same number of teachers and staff. They have to have probably twice as many.
Absolutely.
And then the testing issue. The testing issue, which is Los Angeles is the only school district in the country doing this, has to be once a week. But you can't offer the test and you can't tell kids to go back in school if you don't offer the vaccine to everybody
That's
at the
right.
same time. And the
Absolutely,
last
Howard.
thing I'm going to just say about testing is that the conscious decision has been made by the Republicans and by every Democratic elected official to make it almost impossible for a working class African American or Latino to get tested in this country since the beginning of the pandemic. And as a lot of people have said on here, the reason for that is because if you actually tested everybody who wanted to get tested, then we'd have 3 times more infections and 3 times more deaths than are officially reported.
That's right. I agree, Howard. And you're already getting into something that is really important, and that's how black and brown people are affected. But I believe my son Antonio has joined us. Antonio, what did you want to say, son? You can take the mask off if you want to, buddy, or not, or not. It's up to you, your comfort level. Go ahead, baby.
Okay, yeah. So, like you were saying, it filters to a standard or held to change every hour, 6 to 7, right? I've not seen it change once in my school, like ever.
Right, and the same for this. I work for the City Colleges of Chicago. I'm on the reopening plan team. I'm also on the bargaining team for the contract and to reopen. And they allege that they circulate the air out twice a day. And one of the members is in my union, has never seen it. I don't know, even know. The windows can't even open in the building. They claim they're changing the filters. And we're like, show us the proof, show us evidence. Will not, will not, Lee Mabry says in Singapore, they had, you're going to cry, Daniel. I'm going to start crying. They had 940 cases in their schools. They shut down and went full remote. We are a highly technological country. The teachers have been trained. They've been dealing with this for over a year and a half. Why can't we do the same? Go ahead, Antonio.
And also, we most likely have double what Singapore has. We're still not going full remote.
Yeah, I think so. That's a problem is with, how they're reporting. So okay, who do I need to mute out? Somebody's making a lot of noise. Sorry, brothers, it's not me. Mute out if you're not speaking. Just help me out here. Okay, so Kathy says the vaccinations in at-risk areas of Chicago is almost non-existent. We do not have a public health system to do the job. And she also says that the classes are so crowded that there's no social distancing. It's impossible. Yeah. Even go ahead.
I can speak from experience of this. I mean, first day a child in my classroom got the virus. I don't know if it was the Delta variant or just the standard virus that existed in early 2020, but that's still insane. The first day somebody had it, and we're not even social distancing. I have to move 3 classes of 3 different teachers, and that's not good at all.
Right. And so since then, what I was telling our friends is that since, CPS has this absurd policy that they won't notify the school of COVID cases. They'll just notify the classes that are quarantined. At least I'll give that to the City Colleges of Chicago, that the chancellor will send out an email saying there was a COVID case in your building. The person was there September 1st, and the affected people are being contacted. Even there's been 4 cases, which is a lot to me. Right now, the school's infection rate is above 2%, which is what it was when the system first went remote. But they're still keeping schools open because Biden on down to the governor, to the mayor, to the boards are saying, well, we're going to return back to normal, and it's unhealthy for kids to be home. They need to socialize, blah, 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 bullshit. And I think, I mean, I don't know. It's just they put us in an impossible situation. They really have. And I'm telling you, brothers, if you identify as brothers, that I felt like a terrible mother sending my son and my daughter in the first week of school. And we talked about it and debated it for a long time. And then to have a kid have COVID and then have to be quarantined, that was it. That was my nightmare. And I got to tell you, we did not make the decision lightly to pull it. We haven't unenrolled our kids yet. We're going to wait till we get kicked out before we officially apply for homeschooling because we fought so hard to find a school that was good and get them both in the same system. We were sending our kids to private school because that's another thing. The schools are so unequally funded. And I hate to say some schools are just dangerous, right? And it's not the community's fault. This is systemic racism at its worst. This is how capitalism works, right? Go ahead, Antonio.
Yeah, and another thing is like, I mean, that's not exactly the best because say there actually is more cases than the 4 classes that have been quarantined, and just nobody knows about them. That's not very good because it took a full 2 days for us to go remote, meaning that people that could have possibly have had the virus went into other rooms. Honestly, having to go into 3 rooms is decently counterintuitive because if you're trying to limit the spread of the virus, why do more things to spread the virus? And another thing is people are thinking like this virus is just going to disappear within like next January, but it's not going to happen if people keep doing things like this. I mean, what's happening right now is basically that they have a choice to, go remote and possibly save lives. However, they feel like that after a year, the virus will just disappear. I mean, the flu didn't, and it's been around for hundreds, so I don't really know what they're expecting here.
They're expecting a miracle. And well, go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, I just wanted to bounce off of what Antonio just said. A lot of people, that's kind of the general sentiment in America here generally, is that a lot of people think that this thing is going to go away. I mean, it's almost been 2 years, for Christ's sake. It's not going anywhere. It hasn't been managed or mitigated in any way, shape, or form. So it's definitely not going anywhere. And I also wanted to bounce off of what Howard said as well. It's very much a genocidal policy. I think we have to call it what it is.
Yeah.
If this is what the policy is, if this is what the conditions are, what the objective reality is right now, then it is a genocidal policy because it's allowing people to get sick, it's allowing people to get infected, which is essentially leading them to their death. So and Black, brown communities, poor communities are being hurt. I work in a segregated school, more or less, in a so-called urban area, where poverty is rampant and things of that nature. And things were bad before the pandemic, and they're even worse now. In terms of ventilation, I don't think the filters have been changed in years, let alone hours or days. So again, just kind of rinse and repeat. What was before the pandemic is now, and it's only getting worse.
All right, let him give a chance. All right, so Kathy says children don't live in a bubble. They use public transportation, shop with their parents, go out and play. Teachers are dying through the country at an alarming rate. And she also made the point that right now, Walgreens and CVS have become ultra rich. I don't hear much about contact tracing. How do we know if we've been exposed? Oh my gosh. And I got to tell you, in the city colleges of Chicago, we have one person contact tracing for all the colleges.
I
Great.
think
And in CPS, what was it, like 14 contact tracers, or they're planning on hiring more?
for the total of almost 6,000 schools, there are just about 20 contact tracers now. And the thing is, we don't even have one in our school. So it's really up in the air who actually is going to inform us about this because it's up to the principals at this point to do it.
And our
because-
principal is ethical. I called the contract tracing dude, and I got to tell you, I was on the phone for over an hour and nobody picked up. And I don't think this is uncommon. So I think Daniel dropped off. Sorry, we're having some tech issues. She says, Lee says there are 24 contract tracers. Thank you, Lee. And they are supposedly hiring 15 more. When that happens, who knows?
And yeah, just like Kathy said, we're not exactly living in a bubble because, we're trying to live our lives. However, our lives are being put at risk if we continue to go if we continue to go inside a building that I have to shuffle 3 classes for. And the thing is, I remember the first day, not first day, second day actually. Some kid left the art supplies there, and though that might be not like much, but that's still like a box that they were touching. And another thing is, a lot of the stuff in that room is being touched by multiple kids like a day. So say that there were some like sharing pencils like in my science class. I do not know if those things are getting sanitized, so that's why I just
Yeah, no, he's analytical. Go ahead, Steve.
First of all the schools in the country are following the lead and putting the market in charge. Oakland doesn't do anything about testing or tracing. It has a private outside corporation that they hired that is obviously incompetent. But for tracing, you could use 13-year-old kids and up can do 90% of the contact tracing. You could have a team in every school that just checks, how are you, what's going on, and who have you seen, and report that. It's not even difficult. Secondly, we had parents ask on one of the school boards, they're saying, well, we understand you guys are having problems, but we want to help at our school, and we want to have an autonomous committee that will use our own money and buy thermometers to check everybody and do all the questioning that needs to be done on a daily basis, et cetera, et cetera. And the school board, who refuses to spend their money for this, says, sorry, it's illegal. You can't do that.
Excellent. No, that's absolutely right. And maybe we could talk a little more about the safety committee. But Howard, go ahead. And I'm sorry, comrades, I haven't been seeing your private chats. I've been looking at the public chat via YouTube, but you're all making excellent points. And Paul, yeah, sure, I'll be happy to highlight your remarks. Go ahead. Go ahead, Howard.
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm having difficulty I'm in and out of this conversation, but I think what Steve said is just really important. So what's happened with both the Republicans and the Democrats is they have taken 90 to 95% of all of our tax money, billions and billions of dollars for COVID, and they have either given it to private corporations, in particular Walgreens and CVS, or they have privatized it to the nonprofit industrial complex, led first and foremost by Paul Farmer and Partners in Health. And so what this has meant is that we've lost 100,000 public health workers since 1980, the majority of whom are women of color in every local and state health department in this country. And rather than the Democrats, whether it's Newsom in California or it's Pritzker in Illinois or Cuomo, and whoever took his place in New York, what they've done is they've privatized almost all the money. They have not rebuilt the public health departments. This is an issue of jobs. This is an issue of good jobs. This is an issue of union jobs that they've refused to do. And the other thing I just want to say about Steve's comment, it's time for parents and the students and whatever teachers and staff are willing to work together to take matters in their own hands. In other words, like contact tracing is a great example. You can't do contact tracing by just calling somebody on a phone. It doesn't work just to do that because most people aren't going to pick up the phone. You got to have peers who people know and trust from their own community or their own school go and talk to people who aren't going to pick up the phone to ask them the questions that are just the basic questions of who you've had contact with. And then the other thing that this person from Apple told me is parents got to tell the school, I'm going to quarantine or isolate my kid whether you like it or not. I'm going to tell everybody who he came in contact with to quarantine and isolate whether you like it or not, because that's the right way to do it, not the CDC genocidal way, which is to sacrifice kids, staff, and teachers.
And I love that because I did that. And I'm going to tell you what, I don't want to throw people under the bus, but the administration was like, oh, your daughter's fine. She wasn't in the building with a sick kid, right? And then the secretary was like, well, she wasn't infected. And I'm thinking, this is basic biology, motherfuckers. First of all, what if my daughter is asymptomatic? What if she goes in the building and gets sick?
I hugged her on that day.
Yeah, and they share a room. right? And so my son is thinking, this is ridiculous. My son, I know I keep saying that. My son, who is 11 years old, has more conscience, more critical thinking, more heart, more compassion than these sons of bitches who are making these decisions, you know? And so I pulled her, but I felt bad though. I'm like, ooh, I pulled her. Like, but I know other people do the same. We were talking to each other. And I don't want to say I was chastised, but I was discouraged from saying what classroom this happened in. So I was like, well, let me show you what our system does. I didn't even say who the name of the kid was, just what class he was in. I felt like that was a responsible thing to do so other parents would know, hey, we've had a COVID case. Has your kid been in contact, right? Or you know what I mean? Because he's right. They share the school lunch, the cafeteria. Do they clean? I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but do they clean between sessions when kids come in and come out?
I do not see that.
All right, okay, come on now. If and this is what when it hurt my heart when I heard my son describing what was happening. And again, I don't blame the schools. I don't blame the principal. I think they put them in an impossible situation where they can't socially distance, no matter how creative you want. You know, when we had this little open house thing where the kindergarten, wait, my daughter's in first grade. The first graders were playing in the little play area, and we were meeting the teachers. What did the kids do? They ran up and hugged each other. What were we supposed to do? Tackle them? Right? Come on now. This is what kids do. And they talk to each other, and they're going to take their masks off, and they're going to socialize. So honestly, I really, you know, I'm encouraged. It's only been a week that they've been pulled for tutoring, hoping that they won't get kicked out of the school. But I really feel for the parents, like you were saying, who don't have the option to keep their kids home, who have to send their kids in. They need to provide. So let's talk about that. Besides, you know, let's talk about CARES funding. We mentioned it before. Go ahead.
And the thing is, all of this is protected by a durable fiat, which says that all of this money is supposed to go to so and so. And you know what they did? They're just not listening to that. So the way fiat works is basically it's like a state or legislation thing that allows something to be like literally non vetoable or like completely invulnerable to quitting or not like happening. This was supposed to happen, but it's not happening. The money is going somewhere, but it's definitely not to us.
That's right, brother. Or the Chicago City College's professors, they're not getting money for computers or Wi-Fi, right? Anyway, that's another story. But so they say $2 billion in the CPS system. I know their budget is quite large. It's really more like $4 billion, right? So I'm assuming it's the same for y'all, that here comes this CARES money that's supposed to be used for the safety and education of the students. What happened to that money? Where is it going? Right? I don't know who wants to take this hard question. Howard, you seem like you want to speak to it.
Well, yeah, I think we know where the money is going. So the first thing is, I can't speak for other school districts, but as Maria knows and Antonio knows, what's happened is right now, for the last month, the Chicago Public Schools has had $1 billion in their pocket checkbook. And they refuse to spend more than 25% of that on schools. What's happening around the country is that mayors and boards of education are using money that's supposed to be to make schools safer, and they're basically using it for the black hole. They're using it to balance the budget on the backs of our children and the teachers and the staff. That's absolutely wrong. And that's what's going on. I just want to make one other quick comment about the issue and the lies and the myth that there were very few outbreaks of COVID last school year. In order to make that statement, you would have to do what Los Angeles is doing and test everybody in the building, every student, every staff, and every teacher once a week. Because we know that the younger the child is, the more likely they are to be asymptomatic. That's number one. Number two is, the CDC has redefined public health for the first time in history. It's telling the schools that if John goes home and infects his grandmother, his abuelita, and anybody else in the household or anybody else along the way, that's not considered part of the outbreak. That's an absolute lie in terms of the science and principles of public health. An
That's right.
outbreak has to include everyone that infected person comes into contact with, not just the people inside the school. And and as we know, lots more people got infected inside the school, but you don't know that because they're not testing.
That's right. And after I've had students and we work remotely who have reported that entire families have COVID, entire families. And so interestingly enough, two of the classes of like they had at the second grade and sixth grade class that were quarantined, they were from the same family. I imagine that their family is also getting infected, right? So Kathy, thank you, Kathy, for being so awesome. She says, I hate the message of don't let your children fall behind. I say nobody goes to school until it is safe.
Ahead with tutoring. I'm learning calculus. It's pretty fun, honestly.
Thank you for interrupting me, bro. Shane, go ahead.
Thank you, Jesus. So yeah, in Oakland specifically, like I was talking about the money, I believe you close to 300 million came into the district for COVID. Steve, correct me if I'm wrong. And like who knows? Because I know like the problem is our union has not been much interested in fighting for some of that money, and so there's a big part of the problem. Especially I don't know if other locals are feeling the same way, but
I can tell you about my local, Shane.
Yeah. So
County College Teachers Union, there's specific language that states that if new income comes into into the city, that they have to negotiate with us. And so we tried to open up bargaining for this, right? The attorneys refused. First, they didn't have the money. They didn't understand the federal laws, right? They just kept coming up with all these bullshit. I'm sorry, pardon. No, don't fucking pardon me, Latin. With these bullshit excuses. And so then finally what happened is that we filed an unfair labor practice and we won. And the arbitrator said, if you don't offer the chance to bargain over this money or at least talk about it, then the money has to go in escrow. So, okay. So they refused. We filed a complaint with the state labor board. We were going to go to court in October and we can't even tell them how to spend the money. We just want to talk about it. Let's talk about how teachers are buying laptops. Let's talk about how they've been spending money on Wi-Fi and buying iPads so they can write equations, right? Because they were denying this, saying, oh, we gave you Wi-Fi, we gave you laptops. Let me tell you what, the hotspots didn't work. The laptops were so outdated. I have my own laptop specifically for that reason. So now they're like, oh, okay, their attorney they hired, because apparently they needed more, basically told them, you know what, you're going to lose. So then now they're willing to talk. Now they want to say, okay, this is how much money we got, what we've been spending on. We just want them to have a conversation, right? But it's just so stupid. I don't understand why the unions don't fight harder. This is money that they should be getting for instruction. And I got to say, I don't care. I am so disappointed for us as the American Federation of Teachers and the Illinois Federation of Teachers. Before Biden was elected, they were so concerned with safety. They wanted students to be remote. As soon as Biden got elected, they started singing a new song. Let's put all the kids back in school. What the fuck?
Well, I mean,
it was the same way in Oakland. Like we literally, like all last year, from the beginning of the year up till March, we heard, oh yeah, no, there's no plan. We're not even talking about going back in person. Then literally once Biden said, I'm going to have the students back in classes in March, our leadership said, well, the politics have changed. We're going to now bring them back on a voluntary basis, and then try to bring, K through 2 back full time. I mean, it was absurd. Like you would have thought, like they just threw up their hands and said, yeah, what do we do? And that's what happens when you're in, a state like California, where the Democrats have a super majority in the legislature, in the Democrat in the governor's mansion. Like the unions just like lay over and say, whatever you guys want, we'll do. That's what we've experienced.
And that's such a, oh my gosh, that's so Steve. We have a guest who's not on, but Paula has a comment that I'm going to read in a bit. It's Daniel. You look like you want to speak in or chime in.
Yeah, I wanted to also just say that we'll be talking about Biden. I mean, it was a part of his 100-day plan to open up the schools. So that was his policy, and it's amazing how Biden's policy towards schools and COVID is almost exactly identical to Trump's. But that's
right.
That's certainly another conversation. But I also wanted to mention that Indiana is earmarked for $881 million in the second round of federal CARES for funds. So it's pretty disappointing hearing that that's the second round, because I mean, hell, where did the first round go? So.
Shit. Well, my husband jokes that he says, "Well, they probably use that money to hire more attorneys." Because I'm waiting for the system to get this shit suit out of it. So Paul says, if the powers that be had wanted safe education for the kids, they had plenty of time before 9/21 to thoroughly plan and organize outdoors instruction, reschedule the school year, and do it from June through October, along with preparing for quality online education. We know who they answer to and what they prioritize, but the degree of cold apathy toward the fate of children, teachers, staff, and the general community is indicative of where the society is headed. It's up to the people. And I got to say, I 100% agree. And I am so glad that I met with all of you, because I would have never thought about us doing the contact tracing.
Oh.
Fuck the Chicago Department of Health. I'm sorry. They're doing such a horrible job. Fuck the CDC and fuck CPS, because we're going to have to do what's right for us to keep our kids safe. Go ahead, Antonio.
Honestly, what I find kind of insulting is they had like a full, let's see, so summer starts around June, July, August, September. They had around 5 months to plan for something like this, make a decent plan for online if they had to go back. Well, no, they only gave the teachers one single week to get everything prepared. And the rest of that time, I don't know, they were just twiddling their thumbs. I don't really know.
They were on vacation in some places, apparently. It's fucking unconscionable. I'm sorry. This is infuriating as a mother and as an educator, because we're fighting the same fight in higher education, right? In some places, they're mandating vaccines. In other places, like in my system, they have testing, but the contact tracing is not what it should be, right? So I really think we have to step up our game and escalate, because lives are at stake. When is enough going to be enough? When kids start dying, when community members start dying, obviously they don't give a fuck, but let's talk about vision, because I think it's important to
No, actually they do. That's less money for them.
Well, yeah, we talk about that. Like, what's the plan? Like, I don't get it. What is the fucking plan in watching people die? You go ahead, Howard, and then we'll talk about vision and what's possible. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think what's real important, and unfortunately I got to go in a few minutes because I'm picking my wife up here at the airport. What's really important is, yes, it's super good to talk about what we can do in schools, but if we don't break the chain of transmission by shutting down schools as soon as possible, everything else is secondary. It's really important, don't get me wrong. Testing the right way, contact tracing the right way, vaccinating everybody the right way, but you've got to break the chain of transmission like China did, like Cuba did, like Vietnam did, etc. If you don't do that, then people are going to keep getting infected and people are going to keep dying.
I agree 100%.
It's almost like they're flipping a coin to decide the next choice of action.
That would probably be more logical. He says it's like flipping a coin, because it does seem so arbitrary, right? But other speakers on this, I think you're right. I think you're right, Howard. I think that's what we need to aim for. We need good funding for the health department that's well staffed. We need the CDC to step up its game and stop answering to the capitalists, or else, it infuriates me too to think if the lives of kids is not gonna have you be concerned and be on the streets, what is, right? But let's talk about vision and what's possible. Let's say, let me see. Yeah, we know. Jesus, don't get me started. So, what do you think about this idea of shutting schools down? You were an educator, Shane. Daniel, you teach special ed, and you as a former educator, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that for sure we as a class have to come together and shut the schools down, because they're not going to shut the schools down. I mean, I teach right now. I'm like at the site where they're putting all of the distance learning families that have opted for distance learning. So they literally thought that they would roll distance learning out by putting all the families at one site. So what that's looked like is that our site, my school's called Sojourner Truth Independent Studies. We've never had more than 150, 175 students. And we build out. We start the year low enrollment and we get reassignments. So they basically, transferred all these families that opted in. So at the start of the year, we had almost 700 students, and it's gone up since the beginning. So like, because they you know, like the families they didn't lose the option for just learning. Once all the positive cases started rolling in, everybody started pulling their kids out of the public school, in-person public schools. And because the idiots in Sacramento decided that they were going to have no distance learning except at our site, or that became, you know, like AB 130 was this thing that they dictated distance learning, and they passed it in mid-July, 2 weeks before school started.
What the fuck?
So we literally have gotten now over 1,000 students. And like a lot of these families have been put on waiting lists because they haven't hired the staff necessary for our site to come on. They haven't hired the teachers. They haven't hired the counselors. I've never seen more dysfunctional chaos in my life. And that's what it is. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to dismantle public education in this country.
I agree.
They're using COVID to do it. Just like in New Orleans, they used Katrina.
That's right. That's right. So Kathy says the funding is there. The mayor must use her discretion to use the recovery money responsibly and not pay off the banks and give the cops a raise. And we're also joined with Paul Siegel from the People's Response. Paul, thank you for chiming in. I don't know if you want to add to the conversation. Anybody else want to come in on this question, or should we shut the schools down?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think it all has to be shut down until this virus is mitigated in the least bit. Closing schools would go a long way with that. I think, obviously there's some gaps and some difficulties like special education. There are ways around it. If schools get shut down, you can have a few students with services, come together as a pod with a special educator, and they can still get their services in person, distance. You can have class outside. I mean, there's all different things. There's different things that you can do to accommodate SPED students and students that have higher needs as well, while shutting down the schools and keeping it safe for everybody.
And I imagine that would be a better pedagogy, right? To have put more attention to, because right now, how many students in your class, Daniel? How many students do you have in your class?
So I don't have a classroom myself, but I have 15 kids on my caseload. I teach fifth graders, so we're talking maybe 20 kids or so in a classroom. So not conducive at all. And again, we talk about vision when all of this is over. What does education look like? Education maybe looks like with smaller classrooms, 5 to 10 students to one teacher. That when you talk about vision, you have to get creative and really think about the future. So
absolutely. No, I think so. I think I'm taking a lot of the tech that I've used to make a more democratic classroom. Maybe a conversation for later, but the possibilities are great.
Right.
What are the priorities? Steve, how about you? Or Paul? Paul Siegel joining us. Thank you for coming on. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Absolutely. Go ahead, brother.
Okay. I love that last comment, because as with everything else about this pandemic, it's this horrible plague created, by the nature of the global economy and the ecological crisis and everything else. And it offers at the same time these incredible opportunities if the power of the people can be mobilized to take it on. It, in the first place, offered the opportunity to reconstruct the public health infrastructure that had been totally gutted by 3 decades of austerity cuts, neoliberalism. And now that's a wonderful point. Close down the schools, get things under control, proceed with vaccination, testing, and contact tracing, full speed for what you need, that public health infrastructure, and then reconstitute schools in an era of kind of permanent crises, reorganize schools the way they should have always been.
That's right.
Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Paul.
It's and somehow we have got to get that vision across in a way that effectively mobilizes millions of people. Because one thing for sure, this here ruling class is a sinking ship, and we're going to drown with it if the people don't take matters into their hands.
No, I agree, and that's what's so concerning. well, it's all concerning, but they have no vision. They don't give a shit. And that's I mean, oh my gosh, it baffles me. So Kathy says, I don't get that schools are disenrolling students who don't go because it's unsafe. Children have a right to go to safe schools. And honestly, as a parent, I feel I have a right to fight for the kind of school my kids should have. And they should have a right to a safe school that is well funded, that is not overcrowded, but that's not what we're getting. So Lee says, this is an excellent question. I think it leads to, again, how do we support Black and brown families who need to work? How do we help them strike? We need to think creatively on this. And it comes to this question of how do we come together? Because I see a common thread in all the narratives that you're saying, whether it's a Department of Public Education that's underfunded, whether it's higher education, and to what's happening in the public schools. So this is key. Lee, thank you for asking that question. So how do we support Black and brown and poor families? How do we help them come together? How do we come together? I think that's key. And I know we got some events, maybe the rally that's coming up could be something to talk about for September 25th for the people response, or and maybe other possibilities that we have for coming together. And you may have to speak to it, Paul, because I believe that Howard is dropping off his wife right now at the airport, or Daniel, if anybody else wants to take that question.
Oh, how do we come together? Well, go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah.
I'll bounce off what you say.
Daniel keeps dropping. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, this is really we're at a turning point in the United States historically here. I retired in 2011, and already you could not honestly tell the kids, stay in school, you'll get a good job, because that was gone by that time, and it was less in 2019 before COVID hit. The schools have to be transformed, and they are being transformed because they're being eroded. But people have got to recognize that our local officials are accountable, and we have to hold them accountable. I mean seriously accountable.
Yes.
Not just go and protest to the school board, but really call them out, shame them, and everything else. I mean,
put him in jail. I'm sorry, this piece of shit governor from Florida should be in jail.
Oh yeah. But these guys can be taken on if you take them on directly, and if you allow them to begin to intrude little by little all their assumptions, there's no basis for argument anymore. I go up to Merritt College, which is up in the hills in Oakland, and so therefore it's in a much safer environment. There's nobody there, but the rich Catholic high schools have their tennis teams there, all working out. Nobody wears a mask. They're all vaccinated. And, the parents are all in groups and nobody's wearing a mask. I mean, and they're not getting COVID either. But what's ironic is that right there at Merritt College in the sidewalk, they quote Einstein, who says, "It is the supreme art of the teacher to awaken joy in creative expression and knowledge."
Nice.
I don't think we're doing that with standardized testing. I
Here.
could be wrong. We should give every kid who goes back to school like 6 weeks straight of tests so we can measure the learning loss, which is up there with crack babies as the figment of the imagination of these people who are utter hypocrites. They have to be called out, and it has to be done in a way that Americans can accept, because I think these guys commit genocide, but when you use that word, everybody goes, ah!
Yeah,
and,
right.
It's the truth of it, but you can't say it that way.
I think you're right. I made a comment on Facebook that we're at war. And if you don't believe it, take a look at Mississippi and the COVID cases there. And so you have to frame it in such a way that they understand. And nobody commented on that post. But every other news article I post, yeah, we agree, blah, blah, blah. Antonio, I know you have your hand up. Go ahead, Mijo. What do you want to say?
Yeah, so standardized testing, as you were saying, is not the best way to measure IQ or intelligence at all, because it's so geared towards a specific way of teaching that it's not completely open to almost anybody's mind. I mean, like, you can score well on tests and get really good grades, but still end up with a job that apparently doesn't equal good grades. I mean, you can like not do well on tests to end up working at NASA or places like that.
Exactly.
It's not needed for standardized testing. We need to learn these things, but when most of it is just filler questions that we will never think of, it's pretty useless.
That's a great point. Oh, I think I'm the one that's freezing up now. Hey, listen. So we're going to close out. We're actually, this is the longest YouTube show I've run on radical books and politics because I've had such a great time. I do hope you all come back again. One last comment: mutual aid, mass school exits, and revolution, my friends. All right, Kathy. So I don't know if you want to make any announcements or let people know how to find you on your socials. You've all mentioned some really wonderful organizations, Howard with the People's Response, Steve with the League of Revolutionaries for New America, Shane, if we can support you somehow. How can people find you on social media through your socials or website? Who wants to start first? Anybody? Or Steve, you want to mention the website, perhaps? The Learner website? And I can post them in the comments so people can pick up.
I am trying to type it into the comments here right as you speak. There's a pretty good article on what's going on with education. I'll put it in the website or in the chat. It's from rallycomrades.org, but I'll put all that information in there. And definitely, we've got to find ways to expand this conversation.
Absolutely, and definitely hope you come back on. There were supposed to be more parent activists and whatnot, but I'm assuming they're burnt out. And I saw those suggestions, which I think is great. I think we need to have more students speak their truth, because when you hear it coming out of a child's mouth, well, except for the mayor who doesn't give a shit, but when you hear what's happening from a child's mouth, I think it hits home harder. How about you, Steve? How do we get to know the people's response? Where can people go? He might be typing it. I know the people's response is on Facebook. I think I joined their group there, but maybe if he could post it later, that would be fantastic. Daniel, how can people reach you? You want them to reach you via Facebook or Twitter?
Yeah, you can actually reach me on Instagram, and I put it in the chat there. Totally Dude Poet. I'm a writer and I'm a poet and somewhat of a propagandist as well. So the best way to get a hold of that is my Instagram at Totally Do Poet.
Okay, which I can never remember. So you guys okay. Let me just post this the chat so people can see it, because you are all commenting on the private chat. How we can get a hold of our Daniel, who again is a special education teacher from Indiana. Totally Dude Poet. I know there are some activists here who are very concerned about special ed, so hopefully they'll be able to connect with you. And Steve Miller, you can contact him via email at nanodog2@hotmail.com. I gotta tell you, comrades, this has been such a great talk. For me, it's been super heartening to hear rational people speak and be pro-student. And thank you, Antonio, because you also, have such amazing things to say. Okay, Kathy wants to say that the People's Response meets every Wednesday night on Zoom. I encourage you guys to join a larger network. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Shane.
Thank you, Jesus. Hey, Antonio.
Thank you, Paul and Howard. And I hope we do this again real soon, because we need to fight and struggle. And listen, if this is not going to bring us together, the lives of our kids, honestly, I don't know what is. So we always end with, well, I have this thing. Do what you love to the max and fight for our future. Solidarity, brothers. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Take